You know, it's the strangest thing. When people begin to awaken, they almost always think they're going mad. It's one of the cosmic jokes, really. Because what happens is not that you lose your mind, but that you begin to see how absurdly limited the mind had been all along. You start to notice that the little box you've been living in, the tiny cage of me, of my opinions, of my plans, suddenly grows transparent. The walls begin to shimmer, and you realize, good heavens, this thing I've called reality is not nearly as solid as I thought. And so, of course, the first sign of awakening often looks, from the outside, a little odd. People start laughing for no reason, or crying at the sight of sunlight on a leaf. They forget what day it is, or lose track of why they walked into a room. They find themselves staring at clouds for 20 minutes, utterly fascinated, and then, horror of horrors, they realize they rather like not knowing who they are. Now, in our society, that's called eccentricity, or even insanity. But in the language of the mystics, it's simply the beginning of seeing things as they are. I used to say that awakening is not the acquisition of something new. It's the removal of the cataracts from your perception. It's the realization that the game you were playing of trying to be somebody, to get somewhere, was never compulsory. You start to see through the performance, and that can make you act very, very strange. You may find yourself losing interest in gossip, politics, or the stock market, things that once seemed so important. You might even stop trying to fix other people, which, for many, is the most shocking development of all. But you see, what's really happening is that you're coming out of hypnosis. You've been under a spell, a social spell, the spell of seriousness. The belief that life must be taken as a problem to be solved, rather than as a dance to be enjoyed. When you wake up from that, you may find yourself giggling in situations that used to terrify you. You may feel waves of spontaneous gratitude for absolutely nothing. You may even start talking to trees. And the remarkable thing is, you'll begin to sense that the trees are listening. Now, one of the most peculiar behaviors of the awakening mind is that it stops needing to know what's going on. The old mind always wanted an answer. What does this mean? Where am I going? What's my purpose? But when consciousness expands, the questions lose their urgency. You realize the point of life isn't to pin it down, but to let it flow through you. It's as if you've been holding your breath for years and suddenly remember how to exhale. Of course, this makes you unpredictable, and modern culture doesn't like unpredictability. It prefers citizens who are stable, measurable, and suitably anxious about their productivity. But the awakened person is not anxious in the right way. He may quit a well-paying job, not out of rebellion, but out of a quiet recognition that he doesn't need to keep running in circles. She may stop chasing relationships and instead fall in love with the whole universe. From the outside, that looks impractical. From the inside, it feels like sanity for the first time. Have you ever noticed, too, that when people begin to awaken, their sense of time changes? They stop being in a hurry. They might seem lazy, but what's really happened is that they've discovered eternity in the present moment. The clock still ticks, of course, but its importance fades. You begin to move at the pace of trees, of clouds, of breathing. You discover that there's no rush to get to where you already are. And then comes another funny thing. You become comfortable not knowing what's going to happen next. The ego hates that. It wants control, certainty, security. But awakening is the great unlearning of control. The understanding that the whole point of the game is that you were never the one driving in the first place. The universe drives itself. You are its expression, not its manager. So the weird behavior of not caring what happens is not apathy. It's love in its mature form. It's a surrender so complete that it becomes freedom. You may also find that your sense of identity begins to flicker. One moment, you feel like a person. The next, you're the breeze moving through the grass. One moment, you're the anxious voice in your head. The next, you're the silence listening to it. You begin to suspect that you've never been confined to this body or this name. And when you tell that to your friends, they look at you as if you joined a cult, when in fact you simply left one. The cult of I. There's a period of disorientation that often follows. You may find yourself losing old habits or old friends. You may even lose your ambition. And that's perhaps the most scandalous loss of all in a world addicted to striving. But ambition was only ever a symptom of forgetting who you are. When you remember, the game becomes play again. You don't stop creating, you just stop creating out of desperation. And then, perhaps the strangest behavior of all, you find yourself falling in love with everything. The noise of the city, the cry of a child, the ache in your back, the laughter of a stranger. It all begins to shimmer with an indefinable beauty. It's as though you've slipped behind the curtain and found that the play was perfect all along. You see that the darkness and the light were dancing partners, not enemies. You begin to trust what is without needing to fix it. Of course, this makes you a bit useless from the world's point of view. You don't fit the standard mold anymore. You don't chase the carrot, and you don't run from the stick. You're just here, alive, unreasonably happy for no reason at all. And people ask, what's wrong with you? But that's just it. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right for the first time. So, if you've been feeling strange lately, if you've been crying at sunsets, or forgetting your name, or laughing at funerals, don't worry. You're not losing your mind, you're finding it. The weirdness is simply the world reconfiguring itself around a consciousness that has remembered its own source. You see, awakening doesn't make you special. It makes you real. It strips away the costume of seriousness and returns you to the play of existence, where you were never the actor, but the entire theater itself. And once you realize that, every so-called weird behavior becomes an act of cosmic grace. So, the next time you find yourself talking to your coffee or crying because the wind feels like love, remember, you're not crazy. You're just remembering the language of the universe, the one spoken in silence, in laughter, and in the eternal now. Ah, yes. You see, once this peculiar recognition dawns, that you are not merely a person having an experience, but the experiencing itself, the whole tone of life begins to change. The shift is not dramatic in the sense of fireworks or angels descending with trumpets. No, it's subtler, more like discovering that the background hum you'd taken for granted was actually a symphony. It was there all along, but now you can hear it. And at first, you try to describe it. You tell your friends, everything feels alive, or I can't explain it, but I feel like I'm dreaming and awake at the same time. And they nod politely, or they look puzzled, or they say, you're just stressed. But deep inside, you know that something irreversible has begun. The veil has torn a little. And even if you try, you can't quite go back to believing the old story. Now, this in-between stage, between the dream of separateness and the clear seeing of unity, can be wonderfully confusing, because the personality, the conditioned self, doesn't vanish overnight. It lingers, like a ghost still rattling its chains, insisting that you must do this or that you must prove something, that you must get somewhere. But another part of you, the newly awakened awareness, watches this performance with a kind of affectionate amusement. You catch yourself in the act of pretending, and you laugh. Ah, you think, there I go again, trying to be someone. That laughter is the fragrance of freedom. When you can laugh at yourself without bitterness, you've begun to transcend yourself. You might notice that life starts to feel unscripted. You no longer cling to your old plans because something larger, The current of existence itself seems to be moving you along. You stop pushing the river and begin to float with it. To others, it looks like passivity, but in truth, it's the highest form of intelligence, the intelligence of listening. Because when you are quiet enough to listen, life tells you exactly what it wants to do through you. And sometimes that guidance is completely unreasonable. It may tell you to rest when the world says, work harder. It may tell you to forgive when the mind screams, never again. It may even ask you to walk into uncertainty with a smile, and somehow, despite every fear, you do. Because something deeper than fear has taken root. One of the strangest symptoms, if we can call it that, of awakening is that the boundary between inner and outer begins to dissolve. You start to realize that what you called inside, your thoughts, your feelings, and what you called outside, the trees, the stars, the sounds of the street, are all movements of one and the same dance. The wind doesn't merely brush against your skin, it is your skin. The birds don't simply sing to you, their song is the echo of your own being, vibrating out there in feathered form. And when this becomes more than an idea, when it's seen directly, you understand what the sages meant by saying that the universe is looking at itself through your eyes. It's not poetry, it's physics of the spirit. At that point, the so-called weird behaviors start to appear perfectly sane. You cry not because you're sad, but because beauty has become unbearable in its immediacy. You laugh not because of some joke, but because the very absurdity of existence is too marvelous to contain. You sit in silence, doing nothing, and realize that doing nothing is the most exquisite form of doing. You see that every breath, every movement, every sound is an act of creation, and that there's nowhere to go because you never left home. Of course, the ego doesn't disappear entirely. It becomes a kind of friendly companion, a mask you can wear for the joy of it. You can play the game of being yourself with all your quirks and preferences. But now you know it's a game. You can participate in society without being enslaved by it, love without clinging, act without anxiety. You can make mistakes freely because there's no longer a judge keeping score. You realize that life was never a test, but a play, and you were both actor and audience all along. Sometimes, after awakening, there's a curious melancholy, a kind of homesickness for something that's no longer missing. It's not sadness in the ordinary sense. It's the bittersweet recognition that everything you once pursued was already here, and now there's nothing left to chase. It's the quiet after a storm. And in that quiet, a new kind of joy begins to blossom. Not the joy of excitement, but the joy of being. The still joy that doesn't depend on circumstances, because it is the circumstance of existence itself. And when you live from that space, your behavior continues to look a little strange. You might pause mid-sentence because a bird has started to sing and it seems more important to listen. You might bow your head to a stranger without knowing why. You might dance alone in your kitchen or cry because the rain smells like childhood. You may even find yourself forgiving the world entirely, not because it deserves it, but because you finally see that there was never anyone to blame. In awakening, you don't escape humanity. You rediscover it. You realize that every person you meet is another disguise of the same divine mischief that's playing through you. And when you see that, compassion ceases to be a moral duty, it becomes an instinct, a reflex of understanding. You can't help but love because you see yourself everywhere. You see, the real miracle of awakening is not that you become supernatural, it's that you become natural again. You rediscover what it means to breathe, to look, to touch, to be. You stop trying to be spiritual and start being real. You drop the pretense of enlightenment and find that the ordinary world, the sound of dishes clattering, the feeling of socks on your feet, has been sacred all along. And then the greatest weirdness of all, you stop needing awakening. You stop seeking anything at all. Because the seeker has merged with the sought. The river has found the sea, and the sea was always within the river.